it's time to start. I sometimes give this lecture under a different title, so what you see on the screen is not exactly the title, given in the conference program, but it's basically the same talk. I also have to proceed in a linear fashion, slide after slide. I cannot sort of get the synoptic view and choose which I usually do. So I will do it very briefly, the way I usually do this lecture, although some of the things might be redundant for you. I will do it very quickly. I usually start with questions for the audience, and as you see, this will be really redundant here. I ask people, how many of you experience in your everyday life experiences of non-ordinary states? It doesn't have to be psychedelics, it could be near-death experiences, it could be something that happens in some powerful form of experiential psychotherapy, participation in a native ritual, shamanic ritual, or experiences that just happen. You don't do anything to induce them, you might be even fighting them and they happen anyway. And it's quite amazing how frequent this is, what overwhelming response you would get, even if it's not a psychedelic conference, but just an ordinary audience. What I would like to mention for this particular audience, I will not ask you the question, how many of you had non-ordinary experiences, because I think we know the answer. But I talk a little about a semantic aspect. Current psychiatry call these states of consciousness altered states. And I really disliked that term, although it was coined by my friend Charlie Tart. And the reason for that is that it is pejorative. It kind of suggests that there is a correct way of experiencing ourselves, and that in these states, our perception of ourselves and the world is distorted somehow. Actually, for those of you who know English, in the American slang, you use that term alter in veterinary medicine. I had my pet altered, my dog altered, means castrated, okay. So those of us who have done work with these states have too much awe and respect for them than calling them altered. So we were using for quite a while the term non-ordinary, but even that doesn't really do it. Our daughter is married to a son of a woman who is from the Ojibwe tribe, Native American, and we have these wonderful discussions. And she told me, Stan, I don't know why you call these states non-ordinary. For my people, those are just, parts of the spectrum of human experience. So here I think, fairly avant-garde in the academic circles, but for her this was a very limited way of looking at it. But there is another reason, and that is that not all non-ordinary states are really of interest for consciousness researchers. They might be important clinically, but not really from our perspective. We are interested in those states that are healing, that are transformative, that are evolutionary. And there are many non-ordinary states that don't have those qualities. You can get very drunk and be in a non-ordinary state, and it's not very illuminating. You might learn a lesson or two, but it's not going to be transforming, evolutionary. The same with a state accompanying uremia or typhoid fever or a contusion of the brain. Those are all non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I was absolutely astounded to find out that current psychiatry does not have a special name, special category for these kinds of states. States experienced by shamans during the initiatory crisis, or the states that they induce in their clients, the states that the native ceremony, that the native cultures experience in their rituals, in their ceremonies, the kind of states that the initiates experience in the ancient mysteries of death and rebirth, the states of the yogis, of the Buddhists, of the Taoists, of the Sufis, of the Kabbalists, of the Hasidic Jews, and so on. So since I haven't found that term, I decided to coin one myself, and I call this important subcategory of non-ordinary states holotropic. Holos means whole, and tropic is from the verb trepein, which means moving in the direction of something. Like in the term heliotropism, the property of the plant to always move towards the sun. Now it implies something, the term implies something that will not surprise this group, but many people in the industrial civilization find it very surprising, that we somehow are not whole the way we experience ourselves in the ordinary state of consciousness. Now the best way to describe it is to use a kind of Hindu shorthand. You know, in the Hindu tradition, spiritual tradition, we are not nama rupa, we are not name and form, or body ego we would say. We are Atman Brahman. We have a core of divine creative energy, and in the Hindu tradition you get methods how you can get empirical validation, experiential validation of that fact, different forms of yoga. And if you can experience that divine core within yourself, you realize that that energy and the consciousness that you find is identical with the force that created the universe. So in the Upanishads it says, who are you? And the answer is Tattvam Asi in Sanskrit, means thou art that, you are it. You are not Namarupa, you are Godhead, you are Brahman. So this is what the term holotropic implies. It sort of means states of consciousness that move us in the direction of our wholeness, of our full identity, sometimes in small steps, sometimes in major jumps. So that is behind that term holotropic. And also the root, healing wholeness has to do with healing. So the movement toward wholeness is simultaneously a healing movement. So then when I do it for general audiences, I say, I ask that question because what I will be talking about is drawn from over 50 years of research of these holotropic states, and it's much easier to relate to that material if you had a personal experience. If you talk to audiences that have never had that experience, they have quite a bit of difficulty relating to the material or even believing that some of those experiences are possible. So in some sense it would be like talking to pre-adolescents about sexual orgasm. So it really helps to have the experience. Then I also ask people, which I will actually ask here, how many of you experienced the holotropic breathwork that Christina and I developed? Can I see the hands? Okay, quite a few. If you haven't, we have trained over 1,000 facilitators, quite a few of them in Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and so on. And Lucius promised to bring some copies of different. There's a list of different opportunities where you could go to workshops. So if you are interested, even if you had psychedelic experiences, it's interesting to see how much can happen without the substances. And fortunately, it's still legal. It's we don't have limits for the speed of breathing, and it's not forbidden to play music. Using the bodywork, touching is a little more of a problem, but it's still, one can get away with it. So then I mentioned that my own entry into this was when I was a beginning psychiatrist. I went to psychiatry because I was excited about Freud. My original plan was to go into animated movies. Later I realized I didn't go so far from the original. I wanted to work in animated movies. In the psychiatric department of the medical school in Prague was doing a large study that I was involved in of malarial, which is one of the early tranquilizers, and it came from Sandoz, so we had a good working relationship. And one day we got a big box of ampules, and there was LSD. It came with a letter describing Albert Hoffman's, story. I'm sure this is all known to you. How the drug was synthesized in 1938, and it was found really uninteresting by the toxicologists, by the pharmacologists, and Albert continued doing, further derivatives. He couldn't somehow get rid of the idea that they must have overlooked something with this particular substance out of a long line of derivatives that he had. And so today he says, I didn't discover LSD, LSD called me. There was something that was nudging him, don't let that one go. And so 43, he decided to synthesize another sample, and this is where he experienced this unusual state, and then several days later doing his own experiment, and that famous ride through the streets of Basel, on the bicycle under the influence of 250 micrograms, which he said, being a conservative person, he thought was a minuscule dosage. Actually, I don't know if it's other places, but in California, every anniversary of the discovery of LSD, Albert's admirers do a mass bicycle ride, many of them in the same state of consciousness, as you can imagine. So I became one of the early volunteers, and my preceptor, who was the one who got the substance, was very interested in EEG and also in a particular method that is called driving the brainwaves, or entraining the brainwaves. So those of us who wanted to have the experience had to agree that we would be exposed to a powerful stroboscopic light in the middle of the experience, when the experience was culminating. And so between the second, third hour, or actually about after the third hour, when it was culminating, the research assistant came and said it was time to drive the brain waves. And I laid down, she pasted the electrodes on my head, and then brought this strobe and turned it on. And in the next moment, there was light like I had never seen in my life. I thought at that time it was like what must have been like in Hiroshima, or something that you read in mystical literature, millions of suns and so on. And I was catapulted out of my body, and I lost the research assistant and Prague, the clinic, Prague, and I had the feeling my consciousness became all there was. And then coming down from that state, I sort of identified with the physical universe, and there were things happening for which I didn't have name at the time. But when I read about the Big Bang and the black holes and white holes and pulsars, those things that were happening were somewhere in that category. So I came back very impressed. And I was at a time when I was getting discouraged with psychoanalysis. The narrow range of indications of psychoanalysis, the enormous amount of time that you have to put into it. My own training analysis was 7 years, 3 times a week, a lot of money, energy, time. And I was realizing that even after years, the results were not exactly breathtaking. And so here I was stuck with psychiatry, and after this experience, I thought, well, these non-ordinary states, if you are a psychiatrist, that's by far the most interesting thing you can study. And so in the last 50 years, I have really done very little professionally that would not be in one way or another related to these states. About half of the time was the official psychedelic research, first in Prague, then in the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, where I was heading for several years, the last, as chief of psychiatric research, the last surviving American official psychedelic research. And then went to Esalen, where we didn't have the permission to use psychedelics. So Christina and I developed the holotropic breathwork. And we also worked over the years with a number of people who had spontaneous experiences that we started calling spiritual emergencies, because we realized it didn't make sense to see these experiences as pathological just because they happened spontaneously, and then if these similar experiences were induced by psychedelics or by the breathwork, to see the therapeutic potential in them. So we started working with people when they had spontaneous experiences, finding out that these experiences are really a spontaneous attempt of the organism to heal itself, to get rid of some traumatic imprints. Some of them biographical, some of them perinatal, some of them karmic, and others. So we started talking about spiritual emergency, and Christina started spiritual emergency network. In English, it's a kind of a play in words, where you have emergency is a crisis, but emerging also means rising to another level of consciousness. And besides, I was involved in a lot of other situations, and the common denominator always was holotropic states. So a lot of participation in native ceremonies, with peyote, ayahuasca, mushrooms, and so on, kava, contact with shamans, trying to learn from shamans in different cultures, working with people who were dying. We had this large study of cancer patients, terminal cancer patients, seeing to what extent mystical experiences induced by psychedelics can take away fear of death and pain, sometimes pain that couldn't be controlled by narcotics, and also transform the experience of dying itself. So also contact with thanatologists who were studying spontaneous near-death experiences that happen in everyday situations. A lot of contact with Tibetan teachers, yogis, the Benedictine order, Zen people, so people who had alien abduction experiences. So I was interested in the whole spectrum of situations where the common denominator was always holotropic states and how to work with them. And I was realizing during this work from the very beginning that what we were experiencing and what we were seeing could not be accounted for by current psychiatry and psychology. And had tremendous, revolutionary really implications for a variety of areas. And I will talk about on Sunday all the different changes that we would have to do in psychiatric thinking to accommodate what's happening in these psychedelic states, implications for the cartography of the psyche. We have in traditional psychiatry, we have, as I mentioned earlier, a cartography of the psyche limited to postnatal. Freud said the newborn is a tabula rasa, is a clean slate. There's nothing of interest for psychiatrists that precedes birth, including birth itself. Strangely enough, birth is not considered to be a psychotrauma in current psychiatry. But the immediately following experiences during nursing are seen as profoundly influential for the whole rest of our life. So we are asked to believe that it's possible to experience birth, a life-threatening, potentially life-threatening, challenging situation that can last, 15, 20, 40 hours, 3 days, the child might die in the birth canal, has to be resuscitated, doesn't notice that anything strange is happening, there's no record in it anywhere, and instantly after emerging into the world becomes this connoisseur of female nipples, whether the situation is satisfactory or not, and that can profoundly influence the whole life. So, I'm not saying that the nursing experiences are irrelevant. They're certainly very important, but the birth is of paramount. You cannot sort of have psychology that poo-poos birth and then put tremendous psychological emphasis on postnatal states. So this is something that will be important and what I will be talking about later. So the cartography had to be expanded. We don't carry just the memories of what happened to us after birth and the individual Freudian unconscious, but there is this powerful imprint of the perinatal process. It can be, actually, as you will see, it can be separated into 4 different stages. When people regress to birth, the experiences come in certain experiential clusters, each of them characterized by specific emotions, by specific psychosomatic feelings. Each of those stages has very specific symbolic language that's being drawn from the collective unconscious. For example, let me say just a few words about the matrices. The first matrix is the situation of an advanced pregnancy where the fetus is still in the womb. This could be a good womb or a bad womb. The second matrix is the situation when the delivery started, the uterus is contracting, it's cutting off the blood supply, it's creating a situation of suffocation, and the cervix is not open, so it's a kind of a no-exit, claustrophobic kind of a situation, source of most of the bad trips that we see in psychedelic sessions. Then the third matrix is related to the situation where the cervix opens, and then there is if you excuse the pun, laborious propulsion through the birth canal, where there's a lot of sexual type of energy generated from the choking, so a lot of sexual imagery can come. And then there is the fourth matrix, the actual coming into the world. And they are separated through the experience of death, ego, death, rebirth. And it's not just replay of what happened biologically, but it's emerging into a numinous world. So it's like psychospiritual death, rebirth, as well as clearing the memory, completing actually psychologically the memory of birth. And then it was necessary to add to the official cartography another vast area, which we now call transpersonal, where you can identify with another person, or you can experience oneness with another person. You can experience consciousness of whole groups. You can experience yourself as all mothers of the world or all children of the world. You can identify with animals, any species from primates all the way down to unicellular organisms, plankton in the ocean, or you can become a virus in these states. You can go into the plant life. I had a wonderful experience of becoming, one of those experiences was becoming a sequoia tree, having the body image of a sequoia tree, the circulation of the sap, experience of the photosynthesis, the exchange of water and minerals, all as a conscious state. And on the other side, I had an experience of becoming a carnivorous plant, like a Venus flytrap, in the process of digesting a fly and getting all the gustatory sort of sensation together with it. something that I couldn't conjure up in my everyday fantasy, I mean, for anything in the world. I mean, it seemed very, very authentic. For all practical purposes, I was a carnivorous plant. And it's even possible to become an inorganic material or inorganic process, the experience of being a diamond or being the ocean and so on. And then, of course, there's another whole vast transpersonal area where the experience can take us into the archetypal, into the mythological realm of the Jungian unconscious, where we can experience deities and demonic presences of any culture of the world, even culture about which we don't have any intellectual knowledge. And these are, of course, the observations that brought Jung to the understanding that we don't have just the Freudian individual unconscious, but also the collective unconscious. So anyway, then I was, writing in my books the implications for understanding the, I would say, architecture of emotional psychosomatic disorders. According to traditional psychiatry, these all begin in early childhood or later childhood. If you work with holotropic states, you'll find out always some connection to your postnatal history, but it's not all there is. There would be also deeper connection to one of the perinatal matrices, and then even deeper roots, which could be karmic, which could be archetypal, which could be phylogenetic. Another important implication is that you discover new therapeutic mechanisms. Reliving birth and integrating it can positively influence a lot of psychiatric problems. I have seen powerful healing after people had past life experiences, powerful archetypal energy emerging, including demonic energy. In my last book, or one of my last books that was mentioned earlier, which is called When the Impossible Happens, a story of, a compendium of personal stories. There is a story called Interview with the Devil, where demonic entities sort of emerged in the middle of a psychedelic session, and that had ultimately a powerful healing effect on the patient. There were implications for the strategy of psychotherapy, self-exploration. Those are things that I will go into on Sunday. There should actually be a reversed order of those two talks. But anyway, I have to touch on some of the material because we'll need it as we go further. Now, one of the really, really important and essential implications of this working with holotropic state, was understanding of some really deep roots of those two forces that drive or have driven human history, which is this unbridled violence and this insatiable greed. Gandhi said there is enough to satisfy everybody's need, but certainly not enough to satisfy everybody's greed. And we see these forces operating, throughout history, but now it's a different ball game. We are now facing a situation of population explosion, development of atomic weapons. We have, about 8 doomsday scenarios. We're poisoning the plankton in the ocean. We are deforesting the planet. We are sort of turning fossil fuels into stuff that's poisonous for us as organic creatures. So at this point, it became a question of survival of the human species, and we probably would take quite a few species with us, unless this can be somehow stopped, unless the inner transformation can get ahead of what we are doing. So I will not try to convince you that we are in a global crisis. I'm sure that you are pretty much aware of it. What I would like to say that people in the transpersonal circles seem to have general agreement that all the different symptoms of this global crisis that we see really have a common denominator, that we're facing a crisis of the evolution of consciousness of the human species. We have enormous amount of resources, enormous amount of know-how. It would be easy to eliminate hunger, create a situation where nobody would have to go hungry, heal most of the diseases, make people see, people who have cataracts and don't have $5 in Pakistan to have the lens operation and so on. If we had the heads and the hearts in the right place. Somebody computed that if we take the money that is spent in the world in a week for arms race, that you could create infrastructure that nobody would have to be hungry anymore. And we have billions of dollars for stealth bombers. The Iraq war has now cost, like, according to some estimate, around $1 trillion, and we don't have money for the kinds of things I'm talking about. So the idea is that the current approaches, strategies, which are military interventions, economic interventions, diplomatic interventions, don't work. They generally create more problems than they solve. And it's easy to understand why it is so, because they essentially are extension of the same strategies that got us into trouble in the first place. So we need something radically different. And again, I think that in the transpersonal circles, there is agreement that the only thing that could really make a difference is inner transformation of humanity on a large scale. We have all seen it individually, certain kinds of experiences that transform you in such a way that it levels lowers the level of aggression, creates compassion, tolerance, feelings of oneness, feelings of global citizenship, develop tremendous ecological sensitivity as a result of transpersonal experiences and so on. So the question is, can it happen on a large enough scale, and do we have enough time actually to get ahead of what is happening already? So the question is, what would be the nature of this inner transformation that we would have to go through, and how it could be done? If you look into spiritual scriptures, most of the good spiritual teachers would tell you that you cannot reach inner peace and satisfaction by pursuing external goals in the material world. That happiness is a kind of an inner job. We have to change something very, very essential. It's also, the problems in the world are not like we are okay, but there are some people out there that are spoiling it for us. There are certain fundamental impurities in the human species that every human being carries. People in psychedelic sessions, they can find Hitler, they can find Stalin inside of them. So it's not like Bush says, we are the people of God, and the axis of evil is sort of out there, and we're going to go and eradicate it. It's like the prime example where you can create more problems than you solve with the wrong kind of strategy. Okay, so let me just go quickly through the pictures that I usually show. Again, this is not going to be very new for you. This is Albert Hofmann, the time when he discovered LSD. This is one of our visits about 10 years ago. Where Christina was, if you haven't seen Christina, so she is the missing person there, and Anita Hoffman, who just recently died, unfortunately. And this is when we visited the Hoffmans more recently. with Hans-Ruedi Giger, who's a brilliant visionary artist who is an absolute master of portraying some of the really challenging areas in the psyche that we can visit in holotropic states. And again, his work is particularly important in relation to the topic, because this is also the realm where a lot of the evil comes in the human species. The energy for revolutions, wars, genocide, and so on. I mean, if we have the kind of cartography of the psyche that we have, when the worst that can happen to you is childhood spanking or difficulties of nursing, it's very difficult to understand movements like communism or the Holocaust, or what the Chinese have done in Tibet and so on. That, I mean, difficulties in nursing are not enough to explain that, but there is a realm in the human psyche, and the tremendous potential for holotropic states. We can go there, and we can sort of bring that energy and those emotions and those pent-up physical energies into consciousness. We can sort of work it through. We can free ourselves from those energies. This is Hans-Ruedi and Carmen, his wonderful wife. And behind you can see the size of his paintings. They sometimes cover whole walls. This on the left side, it's Rick Tarnas, the brilliant astrologer who just published a book that I really recommend to everybody, called Cosmos and Psyche. He studied the whole human history, and he found out that repeatedly specific events in history are correlated with planetary transits. For example, at the time of wars, hard aspects of Saturn, Pluto, Mars, major breakthrough discoveries when you have aspects of Uranus, Jupiter, and so on. And we found out together in over about 25 years that you can actually use transit astrology to predict people's psychedelic sessions, or understand why people have spiritual emergencies at a certain time and what the content is. And the prediction can be done archetypically, not concretely. But it's the only tool that I know where you can actually get some idea to where people might go in a psychedelic session. So he wrote 2 books, both of them really very revolutionary. One is called Passion of the Western Mind, and the recent one is called Cosmos and Psyche. This Hans-Ruedi has a passion for ghost rides, and so he has one in his garden, and this is where he took me for a trip. And again, it's a very perinatal journey. As you go through the garden, there are tunnels, of course, and there are suffering fetuses and demonic women and so on. Now, he allowed us to use the upper floor of his wonderful museum in the Gruyere Castle. I understand there will be a sightseeing tour there for people from the conference. And he allowed us to do one of the training modules that we do for facilitators of holotropic breathwork. So we did in the upper floor of the museum, and we invited Albert Hoffman to come for one day, spend one day with the group, and I did a very extensive interview when he described his whole psychedelic history, and he's really also admired Hans-Ruedi's work. I'm holding their LSD, My Problem Child. I wrote a preface to the new edition for it, and I just got it on that occasion. This is the end of the module. There you can see Carmen. On the left is Steph Sparks, who's the director of our training. I saw that Lucius just brought the announcements of the different events, the different workshops, training, for those of you who are interested in it. Okay, so if you look at the history of depth psychology, all the main representatives, beginning with Freud, started from clinical concerns. They wanted to find understanding of emotional and psychosomatic disorders and found some kind of method to alleviate them. But sooner or later, that exploration kind of started spreading to other areas, because as people were free associating, suddenly they were made connections to religion, to the content of art, and also to socio-political movements. So Freud, for example, wrote that famous book, Mass Psychology and the Massenpsychologie und Ich-Analyse, the mass psychology and the analysis of the ego, where he used the book by Bonhoeffer, French sociologist, the psychology of the crowd, where his interpretation was that what happens when people get into a mass movement, like a revolution, war, that they suspend the superego and the whole crowd becomes one big id, the cauldron of these instinctual forces, or that they identify with the superego of the leader, of the Führer. He also saw revolution as an Oedipal problem, as a revolt against the father authority. He did some writing about the war superego, that when war starts, you suddenly get rewards for everything that would get you in jail in peacetime. And it's allowed to kill, it's allowed to pillage, it's even frequently encouraged to rape. Some of the generals offer the soldiers the women in the city if they take the city, and so on. So there's this reverse of values that happens during the war. Gustav Jung introduced a very, very interesting new dimension with his discovery of the dynamics of the archetypes, the collective unconscious and the archetypes. And though he saw initially the archetypes as being somehow hardwired in the brain in a similar way as instincts are, later, after his work with synchronicity, he started seeing the archetypes as forces which are sort of supraordinated to everyday reality, and they influence what happens to us individually, but there are archetypes that can have influence on large groups of people. So there's this famous example when he worked with some German patients before the Second World War, and he realized that there were archetypal elements of the motif of Ragnarok, or Götterdämmerung, twilight of the gods. And he predicted that there was a tragedy coming that's going to ultimately be self-destructive for the German nation. In a book that I've edited, which was called Consciousness, Evolution, and Human Survival, there was a publication by Marie-Louise von Franz, which is particularly interesting for Swiss people. It was called The Transformed Berserk. And it was the story of Nicolas von Flue, the Swiss patron saint, who was for years in his hermitage meditating, and he had a vision of a botanic Christ who looked like a berserk in the bear skin and had the sort of the dark side, very much like the Tathagatas in the Dhyani Buddhas in the Tibetan Book of the Dead have two sides. After you die, supposedly, you first see them in their radiant blissful aspects, and then if you pass that opportunity for liberation, they would show their shadow sides. And in Christianity, there is a projection of the shadow. And so, what was interesting, he had the experience of Jesus with the shadow side. And Marie-Louise von Franz was giving examples from the Bible, like when he gets angry about the money changers, and he comes with a whip and sort of chases them out of the temple and so on. But what was interesting that Nicholas von Flue emerged from his hermitage after this experience, and a war was coming in Switzerland, and he negotiated peace. And this was the last time that Switzerland was involved in any war. And Marie-Louise von Franz was suggesting that maybe it was because the patron saint of Switzerland was able to integrate the shadow rather than working with the projection of the shadow. Otto Rank made some comments about violence, particularly making weapons and so on. His interpretation was perinatal, but very different than the one that you will hear about later. He believed that when people use weapons, that this expresses a deep drive to get back into the mother's womb, inside of the body. What we'll be talking about is that there is a significant contribution to violence in the human species, but it's related to a reaction on the passage through the birth canal, when for hours there's inability to breathe, to experiencing a lot of pain and fear and so on, and it generates tremendous amount of sort of biological fury as a response to it. So when people go back to birth, there's a lot of violent images that they have to deal with. Okay, I will not do this. Are just examples. We don't have to talk about it. From Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Hitler. I mean, you can go through human history. Then here is the bloodshed in the 20th century. The tens of millions of people died in the war, and additional civilians, and then some of the edition in the 21st century, when it sort of rose to a whole other level with 9/11 and the Muslim terrorists and so on, and they brought an element that makes it extremely difficult, which is combining violence with suicide. A lot of the control that was possible before is because people are afraid of death. So that, you can have some ways of controlling that. When a person is willing to kill themselves, it's a difficult process to control. And there's a particular form of suicide and destruction that also has the spiritual dimension, like the kamikaze warriors, where airplanes loaded with bombs, and they would sort of attack American ships, destroy them, and they believed they were doing it for the emperor, who was seen as God, was not seen as an ordinary being. And the Islamic terrorists, expect paradise after suicide and destruction of infidels. And then I have here all the different other problems, the doomsday scenarios that we face in the 21st centuries. Okay, now I mentioned earlier the question about the inner transformation. What would it take to transform the human species in such a way that it would have a better chance of survival? And I mentioned that I'm using this famous tanka, the Tibetan tanka. It is a summary of the Mahayana, Vajrayana ideas about rebirth. and the sources of human suffering. So this is Yamaraja, the god of death, holding the wheel of becoming, or wheel of death and rebirth, in his claws. And then we have the 6 lokas, the Devaloka, the realm of gods, the Asura Loka, the jealous gods, who are really the warrior gods. Then we have pretas. It's very, very important. Hungry ghosts, they have gigantic bellies and just a tiny little pinhole-size mouth, so they can never get enough. So they are like the archetypal prototype of greed. And then below is hell, and then we have the human realm and the animal realm. Now, what interests us here, we could talk for hours about this. It's really loaded with symbolism. But what we are interested here is this center where you can see those 3 animals that I mentioned, and they represent the 3 poisons of Tibetan Buddhism. The pig represents ignorance, the snake represents anger, and the rooster represents desire, lust, that leads to attachment. Okay, so what I would like to talk a little about how responsible use with the holotropic states of consciousness induced by psychedelics or some other means, how they can help us to deal with these 3 poisons. In Hinayana Buddhism, the original teaching of the Buddha, to escape suffering, you have to move out of the samsaric world altogether. Nirvana is, that term is related to vata, which means wind, and means evanescence, extinguishing the torches of life. In Mahayana Buddhism, which is the greater vehicle, it changes. We can actually reach in different degrees nirvana to the extent to which we can free ourselves from these 3 poisons. So what happens in a psychedelic state? We can really gain an enormous new knowledge. We can fight the ignorance. One aspect of it is we can go back to our childhood, to infancy. We can find out that things happen to us that make certain aspects of our life inauthentic. We had certain problems with parental authority, and we go through life having problems with the bosses and teachers and so on. Or sexual problems can be traced back to early childhood and so on. Now, when we get to birth, we found out that to a great extent our life has been inauthentic because we haven't finished emotionally the experience of birth. We were born anatomically, we got out, but we still carry the unprocessed emotions and the physical feelings from birth. In many people, when we do the holotropic breathwork, after half an hour of fast breathing, they are in the birth canal. And so that memory is, can be very close to the surface and really drive people. We can even experience things that happen to us prenatally and see the consequences. But not only do we discover these things, but we can change them. We can bring it into consciousness. We can sort of work on that material and change it. Then it can take us beyond our individual life. I already mentioned we can learn new things about other people. We can learn things about the different animals that we identify with, and get tremendous insights into different aspects of the material world. But that's not really the essence of avidya that's meant by the pig. The pig describes a fundamental ignorance, which is like who we are, what is our true nature, and what is the nature of reality. Like in Buddhism, there's a concept of anatta. There's really no separate self. The fact that we experience ourselves as separate human beings is a certain strange kind of an illusion. The Hindus talk about us being not nama rupa but Atman Brahman and so on. And You can find out that the material world is really a play of consciousness rather than physical world made of stuff, kind of Newtonian stuff. But the most interesting and important contribution of these holotropic states is to discover the normally invisible dimensions of reality. And I don't mean those that science also knows about, like that there are specters of electromagnetic radiation that we don't perceive, but dimensions which are there, which are numinous, which are a source of great religions, and experiences that cannot be detected or measured by any scientific instruments. You have to be in an unordinary state to discover those dimensions. So the holotropic states of consciousness are tools par excellence to dispel avidya. They are the tools of what's called prajna paramita, transcendental wisdom. Okay. Then if you look at roots of violence, I already mentioned earlier that our current explanations are we come from the animal kingdom. So we are the result of the Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, aggression is all through the natural world. So we have concepts like naked apes, the territorial imperative, triune brain, reptilian brain, sociobiology, the selfish gene, and so on. But then we have the book by Erich Fromm, the Anatomy of Destructiveness, where he says, well, the aggression in nature is natural. Animals fight for food, they might compete for sex, they might defend their territory, but there is no parallel to Buchenwald, to Oswiecim, to what was happening in the Stalin Gulag archipelago, and so this is malignant aggression. So where does that extra aggression come from? And then people started looking at depth psychology. Dollard Miller was the first one. It has something to do with the fact that we have long period of dependency, we can experience frustrations, things that interfere with our sense of satisfaction and security and so on, and that's the source of human aggression. But this cannot explain some fundamental aspects of human aggression. It cannot explain group aggression like Charles Manson, or even extreme forms of violence. I don't know if names like Jeffrey Dahmer mean something to you, or Charles Manson and so on. Boston Strangler, these are all American examples of extreme sort of mass murders or sequential murders. And these kinds of models certainly cannot explain movements like Nazism or communism, where much of the nation is swept into this kind of a situation. Okay, now so again, I will not want to reduce somehow complex phenomena like war and revolution and genocide just to psychospiritual sources. Obviously, there are historical, political, economic, and all kinds of other factors. But the fact is that there is one really significant dimension that has been overlooked, has not been discussed, and that is the psychospiritual dimension that we'll look at. Now, in 1975, I published my first book, which was called Realms of the Human Unconscious. And this was the first description of the large cartography, including the perinatal level. And what I described there, that as people were reliving different stages of their birth, that at a certain point the experiences opened into the collective unconscious, and they started having images from wars and revolutions and so on in a very specific connection to the stages of birth. Let's say when you are in what I call the second matrix, you're reliving the situation of the fetus being stuck in the birth canal, the larger images are bringing situations from war in which you or other people as well are in the role of the victim. There are sort of air raids and so on, and you are the helpless victim. You're trapped in some kind of situation. Or some others, it could be like being in a concentration camp, being in a locked ward, and so on. Being a member of a country that has a totalitarian regime, like the Eastern European countries, you get a lot of beating, and they even sort of close the border so you can't get out of there. It's a closed system. So these kinds of images would appear in connection with the second matrix. Once you get to the third matrix, when the cervix is open and it's like a movement out, I'm going to free myself, then the images change and they become images of revolutions. Enough of the oppression will overthrow the tyrant. And we will do it together, and we all sort of breathe freely again. There's a lot of emphasis on breath. And then the people who relived birth suddenly had images of the end of revolution or victory in a revolution, end of war, and so on. And when I published it, I got this letter from Lloyd DeMoss, who is a founder of the movement called psychohistory. He's a journalist, a psychoanalyst, and this is a movement that is trying to use depth psychology to apply it to politics, to socio-political movements. So they study, for example, the personality of the leader, the childhood of the leader, and then try to understand the decision-making of the leader based on the childhood experiences. Or they looked at child-rearing practices of a certain culture and link it to the type of revolution. Let's say, how were children brought up in the American Revolution before the American Revolution as compared in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution, and how it influences somehow the nature of the revolution. So I got a very enthusiastic letter. He said, your observations support my research. I had become interested in the situation preceding the onset of revolutions and wars, and I studied the speeches of the demagogues, of the military leaders. At that time it was in 17 situations. Now he had studied many more. This was from Alexander the Great, all the way to Napoleon, Kaiser Wilhelm, and then talking about Pearl Harbor, and ended up at that time with Khrushchev and Kennedy, their correspondents. And he said, I found one common denominator, which was I was interested in what the demagogues do to turn peaceful civilians overnight into these killing machines. And I found out that one common denominator was that all the speeches had figures of speech, metaphors, images that were drawn from biological birth. The enemy is closing in, is choking us, squeezing our throat, squeezing the last air out of our lungs. Hitler used to say, "Wir haben nicht genug Lebensraum." We don't have enough space to live. And then the leader will also give solution in the language of biological birth. But there is end at the end of this tunnel, and I will lead you to light, and we will all breathe freely. So this was extremely interesting. There were also references to dark labyrinths, to treacherous whirlpools, to dark caves, abyss, and so on. The other interesting thing was Sam Keen wrote a wonderful book called Faces of the Enemy, where he studied posters through centuries. And when, from the time when two countries were in some conflict, in war and so on, how they portray each other. And he found that they always use stereotypes, the way the enemy is portrayed as somebody who is going to swallow us. It's represented as a dangerous spider, as a snake, as a dragon. Now, I found out that those were exactly the same images that we find in the paintings of people who relived their birth in a psychedelic session or in the holotropic session. Those are characteristic symbolic images that come from the perinatal level. Okay, so what Lloyd de Moss suggested, that the demagogue, the leader, is not this great Oedipal figure, the way Freud saw it, but more like a garbage collector, that we all carry deep in our unconscious, different distances from the conscious level. All this perinatal material, these difficult emotions and physical feelings and so on, and that it somehow happens at a certain time that these perinatal energies become more available, they come closer to consciousness, and it creates a certain kind of a tension. And the leader is somebody who has closer to those energies than other people, and he comes out and he spells it, this, we feel threatened, and this is because they're after us. They're sort of getting a grip on our throat, they're squeezing the air out of us, and let's go and get them before they get us. And then once war comes, it gives people the permission to actually act out these energies. And so instead of it being images from the perinatal unconscious, we get them in television, the scenes of destruction and pollution and all those different kind of aspects. And the superego becomes war superego and so on. Now the question is why these feelings would surface on a mass level at a particular time. And this is where Rick Tarnas' work is very, very important, showing that this happens at a time when there are collective transits happening repeatedly. Revolutions and wars have hard aspects of Saturn, Pluto, Mars, and so on. So that's an interesting sort of way you can combine these observations from non-ordinary states of consciousness and from astrology. Rick and I are teaching courses at the California Institute of Integral Studies, which are courses on non-ordinary states, archetypal psychology, and astrology, particularly transit astrology. Now, you can imagine that this, for many people, this is a real intellectual stress. I mean, psychedelics are enough, but to have psychedelics and astrology, and we are very appreciative of the open-mindedness and the tolerance of the California Institute of Integral Studies. Okay, yeah, I don't know. Can you read that, or do I have to read it? These are just examples of. Can you read it, or I might have problems reading it myself from here. There's an example from Samuel Adams from the American Revolution. The child of independence is now struggling for birth. Kaiser Wilhelm talking about the monarchy has been seized by the throat and forced to choose between letting itself be strangled and making a last-ditch effort to defend itself against attack. Nikita Khrushchev, the correspondence with Kennedy, please let's not get into a situation like two blind moles fighting in this underground tunnel, battle for life and death and so on. Around Pearl Harbor, Japanese ambassador Kurusu saying the birth of the child is imminent. It was interesting that the American intelligence understood this, birth symbolism as related to war. One of the videotapes that Osama bin Laden released was, we will turn the United States into a choking hell. One of the last examples was Condoleezza Rice, when they asked her about the mess in Lebanon. He says, as far as I'm concerned, those are birth pangs of a new Middle East. Okay. Okay, then a very interesting aspect of this is, how are we doing? Very interesting aspect of this is related to nuclear warfare, to the development of atomic weapons and testing of nuclear weapons. Lloyd de Moss mentioned a couple of examples. For example, the airplane that was carrying the bomb to Hiroshima got the name of the mother of the pilot, Enola Gay, and the bomb had the nickname Little Boy, which was painted on the bomb, and the agreed upon message, the wire that went to Pentagon announcing successful detonation, was the baby was born. The Nagasaki bomb was called Little Fat Man. It's also kind of an image of a fetus. And then we have again number of quotes. I'll just give you a few examples, but they're mostly from a very interesting paper which is called Sex and Death in the Language of Defense Intellectuals. This is paper by a feminist, an American feminist, who went to a lecture by one of the defense intellectuals. This is the way they call themselves. Those are the people who are charting the American strategic or strategy for nuclear warfare. Where do you place your missiles? What's the strategy of the first strike, the second strike, and so on. Those people are spinning these scenarios, like the first strike on Europe in a nuclear conflict between the United States and Soviet Union would kill about 300 million people in Europe, and whether Denmark and Sweden would survive, it just would depend which direction the wind is blowing. These people are very influential, very rich, and when somebody has a past life experience, we lock them up and give them tranquilizers. It's very, very interesting, And I'm talking about both sides. We have those guys on both sides. So she got so fascinated by the preponderance of the birth language in these meetings that she actually managed to get somehow, smuggle herself into their circles and spend a year studying them and publish this paper. And she has about 9 or 10 of these examples of exchange that was happening around nuclear testing, developing of nuclear bomb testing, and it's all about babies being born and expectant parents and so on. So I will try to read some of. Can you hear me when I lean my head sideways? Ernest Lawrence's telegram to a Chicago group of physicists developing the nuclear bomb said, "Congratulations to the new parents. Can hardly wait to see the new arrival. At Los Alamos, the atom bomb was referred to as Oppenheimer's baby. Richard Feynman, when he was on a temporary leave, received a telegram. The baby is inspected on such and such a day. At Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, the hydrogen bomb was referred to as Teller's baby. Some claimed that he was not the baby's father, that it was actually Stanislav Ulam who conceived it, and Teller only carried it after then. America's atomic bomb, the tests in Nevada, which were called Operation Tumbler Strapper, said there is no such a thing as a normal working day in an atomic test. The labor pains continue around the clock until the job is done. General Grof sent a coded table to Secretary of War Henry Stimson reporting the success of the first atomic test. Doctor has just returned most enthusiastic and confident that the little boy is as husky as his big brother. The light in his eyes, discernible from here to Highland, it was the farm, and I could have heard the screams from here to my farm. Henry Stimson informing Churchill about the successful atomic test. Baby satisfactorily born. William Lawrence about the test of the first atomic bomb. The big boom came about 100 seconds after the great flash, the first cry of a newborn world. Edward Teller's telegram after the hydrogen bomb was tested. Marshall Islands said, it's a boy. You know, so maintenance of missiles was referred to as nurturance and so on. And then there was, I don't think I have time to go through the sexual symbolism, which were also very interesting in Carol Cohn's paper. Things like we have to harder our missiles because the Russians are a little harder than we are, and releasing all our atomic arsenal in one orgasmic whump and so on. Okay, now there are also transpersonal sources. So we talk about the contribution that comes from the perinatal level to the biographical level. But there are transpersonal roots of aggression. I mean, the archetypal world is dichotomized, and there are blissful archetypes and there are restful archetypes. And in astrology, you have Saturn and Pluto and Mars, and on the other hand, you have Sun and Jupiter and Venus and so on. So this is, and there are archetypes also of large sort of destruction, like the Ragnarok, the Götterdämmerung, and the apocalypse, and so on. So there's a lot of the destructive imagery and energy in the archetypal unconscious, as Jung talks about it. And you have, Islam, the whole idea of jihad, sort of holy war against the infidels, where religion is deeply involved. Or we talked about the attacks of the Islamic fundamentalists, the self-destruction that supposedly brings paradise. You have in Christianity, we have 8 crusades. The knights were were being offered money and territory, if they go and liberate the Holy Land. I mentioned Jung, the Ragnarok archetype emerging in the dreams of the German patients. Hitler using archetypal imagery and even shamanic technology. He was using swastika, an ancient Aryan symbol. He was using the solar eagle. He was using the image of the 1,000-year Reich, the 1,000 Reich empire, and then he was using these light throwers, but then these marches was kind of a drumming and so on, in a culture that was living on a very superficial level, and then bringing this powerful archetypal and shamanic technology. There's a lot of literature showing that Nazism can best be understood as a misguided mystical impulse. I mean, it's not just an ordinary sort of, political military movement. I have here that the authors of the strategic doctrine call themselves nuclear priesthood. The first atomic test was called Trinity, and then Robert Oppenheimer described, when he saw the first atomic explosion, what came into his mind was Bhagavad Gita, I have become death, the shatterer of worlds. Okay, so we have this last one. We are still within time, yeah. We started 15 minutes late. Yeah? Can I go for 7 more minutes, maybe? So then the question is the roots of desire and greed. So we have the Freudian explanation that the greediness of an adult person is really kind of sublimated experience of frustration that they experienced on the oral level. They had unsatisfactory nursing, and it leaves them with this feeling of hunger. Then that gets sublimated as they want to sort of swallow the whole world. And then of course money, gold for Freud is a substitute for feces, so it has to do with anal impulses. And then we have the phallic fixation that would lead to something like sexual addiction. Now, if we work with non-ordinary states, we'll find out on the deeper level, perinatal roots, significant perinatal roots for this human quality that we are dissatisfied with what we have, where we are, and we always try to pursue something that lies in the future, to the point that our whole life might not be authentic, that we always prepare for when we really start living, when we have enough money or the right kind of partner or enough power or enough fame. So where does that come from? Well, we carry this record of unfinished birth. If the child is stuck in the birth canal, things are not great. There's this feeling that there is something better that's going to be in the future when I get to the opening. So the trick here is that we were born anatomically, but we were not really born emotionally. We haven't completed. We carry it as an unfinished gestalt. Both in psychedelic sessions and the breathwork and spiritual emergency, people are consciously completing birth. It's the second birth, being born again, dvija in Hinduism. So to the point to which this gestalt is close to our consciousness, we feel dissatisfied with who we are and what we have, and the idea that we have to find something in the future, $100,000. If I had $1 million, if I were a minister or doctor or whatever, whichever form it takes, and then we set ourselves on this kind of linear binge. We have the goal, and we fight the enemies. We remove the obstacles, and then one of two things happen. One is we don't get there. We set the goal too high, didn't do so well. And so we continue feeling miserable, and we attribute it to the fact that we haven't achieved the corrective situation. The other thing, we get there, we have our medical doctor diploma, and we wake up in the morning holding it, and not much has changed. You don't say, this is a fundamentally wrong strategy, I have to find something else. You say, well, maybe another degree would do that, or another $100,000, and you can go through life. And we are surrounded by people who already have all that we think would do it for us. They are the presidents, they are the billionaires, they are the Onassis and Howard Hugheses. They don't exactly levitate in bliss. You can be very miserable with billions of dollars. So that's not really what it is about. But we somehow don't learn until we can really look inside and see that this is a pattern that has very little to do with what we have. Now, I should say, when you get beyond a certain level, if you're living in Somalia and you're starving and you don't have a place to stay, that's one kind of thing. But on the level on which we exist, more money will not add very much to our feeling of happiness or inner peace. That part has to be done. That part has to be done internally. So people who realize that they carry this pattern, they see their previous life as, they say, treadmill type of existence. The image of the hamster was kind of constantly running for something and not really getting anywhere. Joseph Campbell said, it's like getting to the top of the ladder and finding it stood against the wrong wall. So a lot of this kind of a drive can be corrected when we can complete psychologically the experience of birth, and you have really the feeling that we arrived, and that increases somehow the way we enjoy the world. After good psychedelic sessions, nature looks better, music sounds better, lovemaking is better, food tastes better, and so on. And for some time it can be really amazing. We talked about psychedelic afterglow, but to a great extent it stays. The ability to enjoy life in a different way stays. And also the strategy of life tends to change from this life like a boxing match or wrestling match where we pursue something like a steam engine, in a linear fashion. Life becomes more like surfing. If you're surfing, you can't say, now I'm going to go left. I mean, you have to go where the energy is going. This is the Taoist way, doing by being, the Wu Wei. And people who get to that point describe they actually achieve more with less effort, because what they are doing seems to be somehow part of a larger pattern. Also, when they achieve something, it's not at the expense of somebody else, as some of the competitive projects are, but usually it's in the context of some project that also is good for others. So one's own satisfaction coincides somehow with the larger. And I already mentioned, people experience sense of connection with other people, planetary citizenship, tremendous ecological sensitivity, and then particularly when you get to the transpersonal level, you can identify with these animals, with plants, and different aspects of nature. You realize that we are part of it. We cannot do anything bad to our environment and nature or other species that doesn't happen simultaneously to us. Now, just one more little sort of chapter for closure. That really is a significant remedy, but a partial remedy to complete the birth. There are deeper sources of this human dissatisfaction, that we want more than we have. The best way to describe it is to refer to Ken Wilber's book, Sociable God. The Atman Project at this point. In the Sociable God, he said something different that's also interesting, that there cannot be really conflict between science and religion. If it seems to be a conflict between science and religion, it's probably bogus science and bogus religion. True spirituality, experiential spirituality, has to be compatible with science. But what I meant to quote at this point was the Atman Project, where he uses the idea from what Huxley called perennial philosophy, that our deepest nature is really divine. Teilhard de Chardin said we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So we are not Atman Brahman, we are really, we are not Nama Rupa, we are Atman Brahman. Now we as we are incarnated, we lose the connection with this awareness, but not completely. There is sort of something, some intimation of this enormous greatness, how glorious we should be. And then we are trying to achieve it through the limitations of the body, ego, and the physical world, and it becomes impossible. And this is what Ken Wilber calls the Atman project. It's different surrogates that we are finding. Now, the extreme example could be Alexander the Great, who, is not a greater Atman project than Alexander the Great. He was even called, the divine Alexander. So he took all these territories from Macedonia to India. And there's a story about him. When he arrived to India, he heard about this yogi who had the gift to see the future. So he decided to pay him a visit. And the yogi was sitting there, deep meditation. And he really very brutally interrupted him. He says, "I'm Alexander the Great. I understand you can see the future." And so the yogi just sort of barely nodded. And he says, "Okay, can you tell me if my conquest of India will be successful?" Now he has appetite for another, subcontinent. And the yogi, continues to meditate and then says, "What you ultimately will need is about 6 feet of ground." So that's the end of the, of the greatest sort of Atman project. So I've run out of time. So I hope you get some sense of that. It's described in full form in the book Psychology of the Future, if you would like to look at it. And the other 2 books I mentioned were the When the Impossible Happens, very personal stories of these strange things that happen to us with shamans, with psychics, with Swami Muktananda and so on, with strange synchronicities or certain observations where people had past life experiences when we could somehow verify the authenticity of the information that was coming. And then the book, The Ultimate Journey, is about a kind of a comprehensive book about death and dying, the implications for the understanding of death. And then Rick Dublin tells me that maybe before this conference is over, that a new edition of LSD psychotherapy will arrive, that it was sent from California. And to do more advertising, that we should have somewhere that list of the events that you can participate in if you're interested in the holotropic breath work. I think they are actually here. So I will leave it down for those of you who are interested. And again, thank you very much for your attention.